can't just reprogram the locks, Deborah. That's illegal." She didn't even flinch. Just tapped her ridiculous clipboard with the kind of smugness you only see in people who've never been punched by life. Actually, under Section 14A, Paragraph 3 of the Community Guidelines, the HOA reserves the right to override all entry points for safety concerns. I smiled, not because she was right, but because she was dead wrong. "You're quoting an amendment my father refused to sign 20 years ago. I found the original charter, handwritten, in his basement safe. That master key you're so proud of? It violates 2 state-level privacy statutes. And guess what?" I leaned in. "My son installed a hidden cam 2 nights ago. You used it on our door?" She paled, just for a second, then that plastic smile snapped back on like a cheap Halloween mask. "My name's Claire Monroe, high school counselor by day, widow by circumstance, homeowner by hellish inheritance. I've lived in Wisteria Pines for 4 years now, long enough to know the only thing scarier than rising property taxes is Deborah Linwood and open dead wedges. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA who thought they owned your front door, this one's for you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or neighborhood in the comments and stay with me, because what started with a bird feeder ended with the entire board trembling in folding chairs. It was a Tuesday, the kind of humid, sticky Georgia day that makes you regret every polyester blend you've ever worn. I was walking to my car when I saw it, tucked neatly under my wiper blade, laminated and smug. "Vehicle improperly parked. Rear-in driveway entry violates Wisteria Pines Code 3.2b. A warning." 3 things were wrong with that note. 1. I was backed into my own driveway. 2. 3.2b doesn't exist in the current bylaws. 3. That handwriting was unmistakable. Deborah's tidy, over-punctuated cursive. I crumpled it in one fist. This wasn't the first. A month earlier, I got a violation for my porch light being overly luminescent after 10 p.m. I changed the bulb to a dim amber. Then it was a complaint about my trash bins being visible from the street during off hours. Aiden had wheeled them out at 6:58, IEMing on a pickup day. The rule said 7. All these infractions, none of them real. See, Wisteria Pines is that kind of neighborhood. From a distance, it looks like the kind of place you dream of retiring in. White fencing, manicured lawns, fake smiles. But step 1 foot out of HOA line and suddenly your life becomes a spreadsheet of imaginary sins. And Deborah Linwood? She was queen of the spreadsheet. She wasn't elected, she was grandfathered in. Her husband was the original treasurer. He passed 10 years ago. Some folks say she never stopped grieving. Others say she never stopped collecting dues. Me? I say she liked the power. She liked watching people squirm. But I wasn't just anyone. I had history here. This was my father's house, Master Sergeant Eli Monroe, U.S. Army, retired. He'd bought this place back when the roads were gravel and the HOA was 3 neighbors and a clipboard. He died in this very living room. Chest pains and a lazy boy watching MASH reruns. And when the lawyer read the will, the house came to me, along with the old steel mailbox he refused to replace and a half-rotted bench under the backyard oak tree. That bench, God, it meant everything. He built it the week my mom died. Didn't say a word, just sanded wood for 3 days straight, then sat me down beside him in the dusk and said, "Some things you don't fix, you just sit with them." Aiden was 7 when he first sat on that bench. It became our quiet place. Birthdays, report cards, grief. I wasn't going to let Deborah take that from us. When I stepped back into the house that morning, I saw Aiden at the kitchen counter, headphones in, hunched over his laptop, 17 years old and already smarter than I'll ever be. Kid was running a packet sniffer program to monitor signal activity from our smart locks. He looked up. "Did she leave another one?" I nodded. "She's getting desperate," he said. "She's probably just testing you." "No," I said, dropping the crumpled violation in the trash. "She's hunting." He raised an eyebrow. Then, maybe it's time we bait the trap. It wasn't bravado. It was exhaustion. Because when someone like Deborah gets away with violating one house, she moves to the next. You don't stop her by being nice. You stop her by being right. By being thorough. I glanced out the window, past the neat hedges and hydrangeas, and in that moment, something shifted. I wasn't just defending a house. I was defending my father's bench, his memory, my son's peace. And if Deborah wanted a war, she just chose the wrong damn house. Aiden's words kept circling in my head like a moth in a glass jar. Maybe it's time we bait the trap. He said it like he was talking about changing the Wi-Fi password, not challenging the entire HOA system. I didn't answer him then. I just nodded and watched as he returned to his screen, headphones slipping back over his ears like we hadn't just crossed a line. The kind of line you don't uncross. That night, after the dishes were done and the house went quiet, I stepped out into the backyard. I walked past the herb garden my dad built with leftover railroad ties, basil still fighting through the heat, and stood at the bench under the oak tree. The wood was dry and weathered now, but it held like it always had. I sat there for a long time, watching the shadows from the porch light stretch across the grass like reaching fingers. My fingers curled around the edge of the bench, grounding me. I whispered, "What would you do, Dad?" A moth bumped into the light above me, then circled off into the dark. The next morning, there was another note. Not tucked neatly like last time, just crammed halfway into my mailbox like a passive-aggressive love letter. No envelope, no signature, just the HOA letterhead and Deborah's favorite accusation du jour. Excess foliage obstructing view from street, possible security violation. She meant the hydrangeas, the ones my mother planted the year she started chemo. They were overgrown, sure, but beautiful. I hadn't cut them since the day we spread Mom's ashes in the lake. She used to sit on that bench, her scarf fluttering, pretending she didn't hate the taste of green tea. It felt like cutting the plants would cut her too. I folded the notice and dropped it into a drawer in the hallway. Aiden had labeled it last week with masking tape, "Harassment, Linwood." I added the paper to the growing stack. The violations came like clockwork after that. A warning for leaving a garden hose on the lawn for more than 30 minutes after use. A complaint about piano music audible from the sidewalk, even though Aiden only plays classical pieces, windows barely cracked, and then, this one made me laugh out loud, an aesthetic concern over the paint color of our house. I hadn't repainted a single square inch since my dad died. The place was still the soft green he picked out years ago. He'd called it Army Fatigue meets Summer Vacation, said it reminded him of his old barracks in North Carolina, except with better light and fewer idiots. I showed Aiden the note at breakfast and he squinted at it, mouth full of cereal. "Didn't we get complimented on the color at the block party last month?" I nodded. "By Deborah, actually." "Okay, she's unraveling." He stood and grabbed his phone, tapping quickly. "I'm setting up a VPN camera sweep tonight. If she's walking the street again, we'll catch it. Motion trigger, night vision, basic stuff." I raised an eyebrow. "You sure that's legal?" He didn't look up. "She's been surveilling us for weeks. I'm just making it mutual." There was something about the way he said it. Casual, not angry. That made me realize how deeply this had already affected him. We weren't just annoyed, we were adapting, preparing. Later that week, I finally went to the HOA board meeting. It was held in the same multi-purpose room where we'd once held Dad's retirement party. Streamers sagging, paper plates stacked high with lemon bars and potato salad. But that night it felt sterile and hollow. Deborah stood at the front with her clipboard, calling the meeting to order like she was announcing martial law. I sat near the back with Aiden, eyes scanning the faces of neighbors I used to call friends. "All residents are reminded that bylaws must be respected equally," she said, voice crisp and devoid of warmth. "No exceptions, regardless of personal history." I saw Marla Jennings, one of the quieter board members, shift in her seat beside her. She didn't raise her hand or speak, but her fingers gripped the edge of her chair like she was holding something in. Deborah glanced our way and gave me that polite, teeth-baring smile. The kind of smile that says, "I already filed your next violation." I smiled back, but mine said something different. Not this time. I wasn't just here to sit quietly anymore. I was watching now. And the trap, whether Deborah knew it or not, was already half built. Deborah called the meeting to a close with a dry smile and a threat disguised as formality. "We appreciate your cooperation and commitment to our community standards," she said, voice syrupy and hollow. Aiden leaned toward me and muttered, "She talks like she's addressing kindergartners before a fire drill." I smirked but kept my eyes on the board table. I wasn't watching Deborah anymore. I was watching Marla Jennings. She hadn't said a word the entire meeting, just sat there, motionless, except for the subtle twitch in her left hand. I noticed it when Deborah mentioned emergency access privileges. Marla's fingers tightened on the edge of her clipboard, knuckles whitening. She glanced at the room, eyes flickering like a deer scanning for cover, then looked down again, shoulders sinking. When people tell you who they are, believe them. When they can't tell you, watch their body. As we left the meeting, Marla caught my eye, only for a second, but it lingered long enough to register something between apology and warning. Her lips moved, barely, not a full word, just a ghost of one. I didn't know what she meant at the time, but I would. We stepped outside into the sticky night air. The parking lot was dim, one street lamp flickering in an annoying rhythm overhead. "Did you see her?" I asked Aiden as we reached the car. "Marla? Yeah." She looked like she was about to throw up. "She knows something." Aiden tapped his phone against his palm. "Think we can get her to talk?" "Maybe, if she feels safe enough." He opened the car door but paused before getting in. Safe from what, though? Deborah? I didn't answer. The silence was thick with something we weren't ready to name yet. That weekend I made a point of walking the neighborhood like I used to before everything went sideways. It was Saturday morning, early enough that sprinklers still hissed across trimmed lawns. Aiden was out back setting up his motion-activated rig with a heat sensor. I told him I needed to clear my head. That was only half true. I passed by Marla's house. Blue shutters, 2 wind chimes hanging unevenly from the porch. The blinds were open. She stood by the front window, watering a dying ficus that looked like it had given up last year. She saw me. To my surprise, she stepped outside. "Claire." Her voice was a little too flat, like she was rehearsing something. She crossed her arms over her cardigan. "Hi, Marla. I know. I saw your son installing the camera." I tensed. "We're just being cautious." She hesitated. Her fingers brushed her wedding ring absently. "Is it true?" she asked. "Did Deborah really try your door?" I didn't answer with words, just nodded once. Marla didn't react, not dramatically, anyway, but her fingers curled against her elbow, gripping the sweater tight. Her gaze dropped to the porch steps. A long breath escaped her lips. She told me it was protocol that if residents missed 3 board notices, the HOA had the right to perform wellness checks. "She's lying," I said. "I know," her voice cracked, barely. "She used the key on mine too. Last winter. I was sick with the flu. She said she was checking on me." A pause. "But when I woke up, she'd already come and gone." I didn't speak. I couldn't. Marla looked back toward her door. She threatened to fine me if I told anyone. Said I'd be in violation of community decorum. That phrase, community decorum, Deborah's favorite leash. "I have to go," Marla said quickly, "but you're not wrong to protect yourself." She stepped back inside before I could thank her. I walked home in a daze. It wasn't just about me anymore. This wasn't petty fines or overgrown bushes. Deborah was crossing thresholds, literally. When I got back, Aiden was on the porch, laptop balanced on his knee. He looked up as I stepped past the gate. "Where were you? Talking to someone who's just as scared as we are?" He tilted his head. "She cracked?" "Not yet," I said, "but she's splintering." That night, I walked through the house slowly, checked every lock twice, not because I was afraid, because I knew what was coming. Before I went to bed that night, I checked every lock again. Not out of fear, but because I knew someone else out there wasn't checking theirs, and next time, it might not be just a door they crossed. Has anything like this ever happened in your neighborhood? Let me know where you're watching from, city, town, or HOA battleground. Your story might be more familiar than you think. It was the sound of the handle. Not loud, not aggressive, just a slow, subtle jiggle, barely enough to rattle the deadbolt. But I knew that sound. It didn't belong to wind or a curious raccoon. It belonged to someone holding a key. I was already halfway down the hall before I even knew I'd moved. The house was dark except for the faint kitchen nightlight casting long shadows across the hardwood. My hand slid across the wall until I found the light switch. Nothing. I flicked it again, still nothing. My chest tightened. "Aiden," I whispered, just loud enough to carry down the hall. "Aiden, wake up." I heard the creak of his door, then bare feet against the floor. He came out with that old wooden bat he kept beside his bed. Not because he played baseball, but because his dad used to. We moved toward the front door together. The handle jiggled again. Aiden froze, one hand on my shoulder. Through the frosted glass, we saw the silhouette, tall, slender, purposeful, not lingering, not fidgeting, just trying. The figure paused, then took 2 quick steps away, disappearing into the shadows. We both bolted to the window. Aiden pulled the curtain just enough to see. "There," he said, "by the sidewalk, black skirt, red heels." Red heels. Deborah's trademark stilettos, the ones that clacked like gunfire on pavement. No one else wore those around here. No one else had reason to. My throat went dry. She used the key. Aiden stared at the door. "You think she had it on her?" "No," I said quietly. "She already had it copied." We didn't sleep that night. Aiden replayed the exterior cam footage on a loop, isolating the grainy clip of her shape just as she disappeared past the driveway. The timestamp was clear. 1:47. The next morning, I called the police. They sent Officer Timmons, same guy who patrolled the area during summer break. Late 30s, decent guy, usually wore his sunglasses too long after sunset. He watched the footage, arms folded, jaw tight. "You got this from your son's system?" "Yes." "Legally installed?" I nodded. "All within property lines, no audio recording." He scratched his cheek. "Well, it's not breaking and entering, since she didn't actually get inside, and if she has access to a master key under HOA authority..." I cut in. "That key was only meant for fire and medical emergencies. We never signed off on universal access." Timmons sighed and glanced around the room like he didn't want to be in it anymore. "I'll file the report," he said, "but I'd suggest you take this up with the board, and get a private lawyer if it keeps happening." He left his card and a printed incident number. That was all. I wasn't expecting a cavalry, but I expected more than that. Later that afternoon, I sent an email to the entire HOA board. No accusations, just a formal notification of a suspicious attempted entry and a request for camera footage from the common area streetlight cams. No one responded, except Marla. She didn't reply in writing. She showed up at my door. "I heard what happened," she said quietly, eyes darting to the porch camera. "She's pushing too far." "You think?" She stepped inside without waiting for an invite. She wasn't the trembling board member anymore. She looked tired, yes, but there was fire behind her eyes now. "She's been accessing the tool shed key too," Marla said. "Opened mine last week. Moved things. I didn't even notice until I found a new lock on the fertilizer bin." "Why would she do that?" "She's looking for something," Marla said, "or making it look like she is." She didn't stay long. Just long enough to tell me that more people were beginning to whisper, quietly, carefully, but there were cracks forming. After she left, Aiden sat beside me at the kitchen table. He had his phone in one hand and a page of old HOA regulations I'd printed out in the other. "We can't wait for her to slip," he said. "She already is." I nodded. It's not about waiting anymore. It was time to dig. Not just into what she did, but into how she got the right to do it. Because locks don't turn themselves, and doors don't rattle in the dark without someone standing on the other side. Has someone in your neighborhood ever crossed the line? Ever had to fight to protect what's yours? Let me know where you're watching from. I want to hear your story. Aiden was still at the table, headphones around his neck, eyes darting between the regulation binder and his screen. I stood in the doorway, staring past him, something tightening behind my ribs. She'd crossed a line. Again, and I kept thinking about what Marla said. She's looking for something. And what? I walked past the hallway mirror and stopped. I looked like my mother. Tired in the eyes, lips pressed too tight. The kind of woman who knew how to swallow things. Grief, anger, fear, and keep walking. I didn't want to keep walking anymore. I wanted to dig. I turned back down the hall and opened the basement door. The light switch flickered once, then came on. Bare bulb, no shade. It gave off that cold white hum that always made the stairs feel steeper than they were. I gripped the rail and went down slowly, one creaking board at a time. The smell hit me first. Old wood, dust, and the faint iron tang of rusting tools. I hadn't been down here in months. Dad kept everything labeled, even his junk. Shelves ran along the left wall. Ammo cans full of screws, coffee tins of washers, a tackle box stuffed with receipts from the 9DS. And in the far corner, beside a broken shop vac and a half-used can of stain, sat the old army trunk. It was green, dented, and locked with a padlock I remembered hating as a kid because the key never fit right. I crouched and pulled it forward. Dust bloomed into the air. My fingers found the latch. The padlock was open. Not hanging loose, not undone. Open! I stared at it for a beat. My hands went cold. Someone had been down here. I lifted the lid. Inside was exactly what I remembered. Folders, maps, medals in their little velvet boxes. His service papers. Beneath those, manila envelopes. One marked HOA Charter 1992 Final, handwritten in black marker. I sat right there on the cold cement floor and opened it. Inside were 30 pages of typed bylaws, yellowed with time. But the top sheet caught me. My father's writing, firm and careful. Emergency access clause strike from. Final, no unmonitored access. Written consent required. Signed, Eli Monroe. I read it twice, then a third time. My pulse thudded in my ears. This was it. The clause Deborah swore existed, the one she'd been quoting, he'd had it removed. My dad had refused to allow anyone unrestricted access to private homes. I dug deeper. There was a second envelope, board correspondence, Linwood. Inside were scanned letters and printed emails, early 2000s. Some were half hidden, others barely legible, but they told a story. Deborah had tried once before. She'd pitched a safety access policy back in 2006 after a neighbor died of heat stroke and wasn't found for 2 days. On the surface, it sounded noble, but Dad's notes beside the email said otherwise. Abuse potential too high, locks equals power. I sat back against the cool wall and exhaled. Claire? Aiden's voice floated down the stairs. Basement, I called, not moving. He came down carefully, his socked feet barely making a sound. When he reached me, I handed him the access clause. He read it, mouth tightening. This proves she's been lying about the bylaws. And she knew Dad blocked it, I said. She was on the board back then. Aiden looked at the open trunk. She's been down here, hasn't she? I nodded, looking for this. She didn't find it. Not all of it. He knelt beside me. We scan everything, every page, create backups. We keep the originals locked up somewhere she won't think to check. Already ahead of you, I said, standing, but I need one more thing before we make a move. Leverage. We packed the trunk back up, relocked it, and carried a copy of the folder upstairs. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something shift in my spine. Not fear, not caution. Wait, because now I had proof. And she had a problem. Aiden had already set the printer buzzing before I poured my coffee. He stood over the scanner like a man on a mission, one hand flipping through the documents, the other tapping notes into his phone. His focus was razor sharp. I sipped from my chipped One Mom mug and watched him. For the first time in a while, I didn't feel the weight alone. We should print double, he said without looking up. One for the lawyer, one for us. And one to send anonymously, I added, just in case something happens. He looked up. You think it'll get that far? I didn't answer. Instead, I walked to the cabinet near the living room, one we hadn't touched in months, and opened the bottom drawer. There, underneath a stack of faded board games and an unopened box of Christmas lights, sat the old camcorder. Dad used to film everything on that thing. Little league games, birthday parties, Mom's last few months. He said memories were like fruit. You had to preserve them or they'd rot. I pulled it out, dusted it off, and clicked the battery latch. Empty. Aiden, now fully curious, crouched beside me. You think there's footage on the tapes? There might be something, I said, especially from the HOA meetings in the early 2000s. Dad always recorded when Deborah spoke, said her voice set off his gut. We plugged the charger in and left the camcorder running while we reviewed the scanned documents. 20 minutes later, it beeped and the menu came to life. Aiden slipped in the oldest labeled tape for the meeting, July 2004. The screen crackled, then blinked into focus. The video opened with a slow pan across the old rec center. Everything was familiar, except younger. Deborah stood at the front, her hair darker but still helmet perfect. Her voice echoed through the speaker, and I propose again that we revisit the emergency key access protocol for health and safety reasons. Dad's voice cut in from behind the camera. Again? We voted that down last year. Yes, Deborah snapped, but I believe the board misunderstood the severity of the risk. That's not your call. The camera zoomed slightly, capturing Deborah's clenched jaw. Her voice dipped lower. If we wait for someone to die before we act, the blood's on our hands. Aiden hit pause. That's it. That's the moment. I nodded, and we've got it on tape. He rewound the scene and played it again, recording the footage on his phone for redundancy. Every instinct I had said to upload a backup somewhere off-site. But for now, we needed to keep it quiet, controlled. Outside, the wind had picked up. The hydrangeas bobbed under the pressure like they were trying to whisper something to the windows. I glanced out, half expecting to see Deborah lurking by the sidewalk again. But the street was still. Why? Too quiet. Later that evening, Aiden came back into the room holding another small tape, unlabeled. Where'd you find that one? I asked. Bottom of the box, tucked under the lining. He slid it into the camcorder and pressed play. It wasn't an HOA meeting. It was the backyard. The bench under the oak, my father sitting on the edge, elbows on his knees, the camera was propped on a crate, recording silently. Then I appeared, 16 years old, braces, my hair tied up like I was trying to be older than I was. I sat beside him and we just sat, not talking, just watching the sun through the leaves. Dad finally spoke. Colday, you're gonna own this house, he said. People like Deborah, they think rules make them gods. But they only win when good people stop looking. He glanced toward the camera. If she ever gets her way, check the box in the basement. The footage clicked off. Aiden stared at the screen. He knew. Yeah, I whispered. He really did. And I suddenly realized the bench wasn't just a symbol. It was a witness. The only place that had seen it all. We weren't just defending property anymore. We were answering a call. Have you ever found a message from the past that changed your present? Tell me where you're watching from. I want to know who else out there still listens to what's been left behind. We watched the tape one more time before powering off the camcorder. Neither of us said a word. There was nothing left to say. Dad hadn't just suspected Deborah would abuse the system. He'd practically left us a breadcrumb trail. That afternoon, Aiden backed up the footage in 3 separate encrypted files. One on his laptop, one on an external drive, and one buried in a dummy email account titled Old Bird Feeder Vids at... He smirked when he showed me the password, Linwood Lies 4. I stared at it, morbid but accurate. We weren't done yet. The footage gave us the truth. What we needed now was strategy. Aiden slid the HOA directory across the table. We've got 5 board members. Deborah, Marla, Stan, Carol, and Bishop. Carol and Bishop are hers, I said. They vote with her every time. Stan? Is barely conscious most meetings. So, Marla. I nodded. Marla! The next morning, I knocked on her door. She opened it like she expected me. Come in, she said softly, voice barely above a whisper. Her face was pale, like sleep hadn't visited. I stepped inside. Same wind chimes still clinking against each other in slow, uncertain rhythm. Her house smelled faintly of lavender and something older, dust perhaps, or memory. I sat at her kitchen table while she brewed coffee without asking. When she handed me the mug, I saw her hands again, still trembling. You know she's been inside your house, I said. Marla nodded. I knew before you did. And you let it go? She sat slowly. I tried not to see it, pretended it didn't matter because she told me I owed her. Owed her? He helped me keep my sister's ramp. It wasn't up to code. HOA wanted it removed. Deborah said if I supported her policies, she'd overlook it. It's blackmail. She called it community compromise. We sat in silence for a long moment. Outside, a sprinkler ticked to life, slicing the silence. I have footage, I said, from 2004. My dad recorded a board meeting. Deborah pushed for the master key rule. He blocked it. It was struck from the original charter. Marla looked at me like she was both relieved and terrified. And I have copies of the papers from the basement, I added. Handwritten annotations. Everything. Her lips parted, but no words came. I'm asking for your help, I said, not just as a neighbor, but as someone who's tired of living like a trespasser in her own home. Marla reached under the table and slid over a small USB. I blinked. What is this? Meeting minutes. The real ones. I've been keeping backups for 2 years. Deborah edits the official records, sanitizes the votes, rephrases objections. I never told anyone, not until now. I picked it up, careful not to react too fast. This is enough to blow it all open. Marla shook her head. It's enough to make her panic. Back home, Aiden loaded the drive and started comparing meeting minutes. The differences weren't minor, they were surgical. She's been erasing dissent, he said, crafting a legal record that makes it look unanimous. She's not careful, I muttered. She's deliberate. That night, we planned the trap. We would call for a formal hearing, one we were entitled to under HOA regulations. Every violation they issued had to be reviewable, if requested, in writing. But instead of fighting the fines, we'd turn it into something bigger. We'd request an audit of the board's decisions, citing irregularities in the vote logs. We'd play the tape, and if they tried to shut us down, we'd go public. Email the footage to the neighborhood thread. Let the court of public opinion do what the bylaws couldn't. I'm sending the certified request in the morning, I told Aiden. He grinned, a rare flicker of confidence. Let's rattle her hinges. The certified letter went out on Monday. Aiden stood beside me at the post office as I slid it into the slot. Official request for a formal HOA hearing under the Resident Compliance Dispute Act, buried deep in the bylaws Deborah never expected anyone to read. The kind of section you only find if you're angry, patient, or both. 48 hours later, I got the email. Dear Ms. Monroe, your request has been received and a hearing will be scheduled at the next board meeting. Please be prepared to present your documentation. It was signed not by Deborah but by Bishop Harper, her most loyal lapdog. Aiden cracked a smile when he read it. She didn't even have the nerve to sign it herself. I replied with a single sentence. Thank you. I look forward to discussing this in a public forum. We didn't have to wait long. The meeting was set for Thursday evening. That gave us 2 days. 2 days to prepare every clip, document, and question. 2 days to tighten every bolt in our case. And 1 night to set the trap. That night, Aiden placed a fake violation on the front porch, an obviously forged parking citation printed in slightly off-colored ink and folded just enough to look official. He left it under a potted plant and angled the front cam directly at the door. He rigged the system to ping our phones the second anyone touched the note. At 2:14 a.m. we both got the alert. The feed loaded fast. Deborah, in her bathrobe, clutching a flashlight like a dagger, stepped into the frame. Her hair was pulled back, slippers whispering against the brick as she knelt beside the plant. Her fingers hovered over the fake ticket, then picked it up. She read it, scowled, glanced at the camera. Too late. Click. Aiden grinned. Got her? She walked away fast, trying to look casual, but her hands were shaking. We had what we needed. The next day, I spent the morning in the sunroom, sorting everything into folders. Hard copies, flash drives, one emergency envelope to leave with Marla, just in case. The house was quiet, except for the low hum of the printer and the occasional creak of the wood under my feet. I sat down for a second, and my eyes drifted outside. The hydrangeas, still blooming, still untouched. It reminded me of Mom, of her hands digging into the dirt, refusing to let something die just because it was struggling. That night, I wore the navy blazer I hadn't touched since the funeral. Aiden wore a black hoodie and jeans, his laptop tucked under one arm like armor. The rec center lights were too bright, the room too quiet. We weren't the only ones there. Neighbors I hadn't seen in months showed up, some sitting in the back, some hovering near the door. Whispers passed like wind before a storm. People knew something was coming. Deborah entered late. She wore her usual crimson lipstick and an expensive shawl that made her look more like a senator than a subdivision president. She didn't look at me, but I watched her. She moved slower, more cautious. She felt it. Bishop opened the meeting, calling for decorum and respectful conduct. Deborah sat straight, hands folded like a queen, waiting for her crown. And then Bishop announced it. We will now hear from Miss Claire Monroe, who has filed a request under Article 6, Section D. I stood, held my paper steady. My voice didn't shake. Thank you. I'm here tonight not just to challenge the recent violations against my property, but to address deeper concerns about the actions and authority of this board. Eyes lifted, phones tilted up to record. I took a breath. I have original documents showing the emergency access clause was struck from the charter. I have footage from 2004 of this board, led by Ms. Linwood, attempting to reinstate that clause against prior votes. Deborah blinked, just once. And I have video of Ms. Linwood accessing my front porch in the middle of the night, inspecting a private notice, in clear violation of both HOA regulations and my privacy rights. Aiden pressed play on the clip. Gasps, a cough, the sound of someone shifting too fast in their chair. Deborah's jaw locked. She looked down. I kept going. This isn't about a bird feeder or paint color. It's about trust and who we give keys to. The silence after my statement was louder than anything I'd ever said. Nobody moved, not even Bishop, who usually filled dead air with awkward coughs or procedural jargon. Deborah stared straight ahead, her knuckles pressed so hard into the table that the skin around her wedding band had gone pale. Aiden leaned back slightly, eyes locked on her like he was reading every twitch. And just like that, the meeting was over. No rebuttal, no apology, just a brittle, "We'll adjourn to review the matter and reconvene next week." I left the rec center with no victory music playing, no high fives in the parking lot. Just the quiet shuffle of footsteps and the heavy thump of neighbors rethinking everything they believed about the HOA. Oh, but it wasn't over. Not yet. Deborah doesn't lose quietly. By noon the next day, a letter appeared on my doorstep, slipped between the screen and the door frame with surgical precision. Notice of community disruption. You are being fined $8,500, 0 cents for acts of slander, public defamation of a board official, and refusal to comply with Wisteria Pines decorum standards. I read it 3 times. Each line was more absurd than the last. Aiden held the paper like it might catch fire. She's trying to bleed us out, legally. She's scrambling, I said. That means we hit the nerve. He set the letter down. Now we make it public. All of it. We uploaded the 2004 footage, the porch video, and scans of the original charter to a private webpage titled hope@wistacheria.com. Marla agreed to share it with a few trusted neighbors, quietly, carefully. By that evening, the site had over 400 views. The next morning, the hydrangeas were cut. Clean across the middle. Stems snapped, leaves strewn across the soil like some kind of silent warning. Aiden stood on the porch, mouth open, phone recording. She really did it, he muttered. She cut the one thing she knew mattered. I crouched near the base of the bush, running my fingers over the severed ends. No note, no email, just destruction. She's not trying to fine us anymore, I said quietly. She's trying to break us. Aiden didn't speak. He just walked back inside. Later that afternoon, I saw Carol and Bishop standing outside Deborah's house. Their heads were close, voices low. They didn't look at me as I walked by, but they didn't stop talking either. They were starting to splinter. That night, the neighborhood message board, usually full of lost pet alerts and barbecue invites, lit up with a thread titled, "Did anyone else get a visit from Deborah last night?" 12 replies in the first hour. By morning, 26. Marla texted me a screenshot with one line, "It's working." But Deborah wasn't done, not yet. On Friday, a flyer appeared taped to every mailbox in the neighborhood, glossy, double-sided, and professionally printed. Help restore order to Wisteria Pines. Vote to remove Claire Monroe as resident. She framed it like a recall, even though no such position existed, claimed I'd endangered the community with false allegations, hacked footage, and manipulated records. Aiden laughed, bitter and low. She's calling us cybercriminals now? I pulled the flyer from our mailbox and walked back inside. She's using the same tactics she's always used: confuse, overwhelm, intimidate. And what do? I walked over to the fireplace where Dad's shadow box hung. His medals, his flag, his rank plate. I touched the edge and whispered, We hold. Aiden nodded. Then let's get ready for the next meeting because this time, she's the one being reviewed. Have you ever had someone retaliate because they knew the truth was finally catching up to them? Tell me where you're watching from, because silence only protects them. Your voice might be the thing that ends their control. I didn't sleep much the night after the flyers. It wasn't the words that got to me, it was the fact she knew exactly where to hit. The hydrangeas, the false fines, the glossy propaganda taped to every mailbox. Deborah wasn't just defending power anymore. She was fighting like someone with something to lose, which meant we were close. By morning, my living room looked like a war room. Papers were stacked on every surface, laptops open, sticky notes on the window panes. Aiden was on the floor, barefoot and wired from too much soda, cutting clips together on his editing timeline. This version keeps the most damning part, he said, gesturing at the screen. The moment she says emergency overrides and Dad calls her out, back to back with the porch footage, I nodded, flipping through a file folder with the original bylaws. Marla had dropped off a second USB that morning, just in case she tries to erase everything, she said, before quickly retreating to her car. Her hands had stopped shaking. I spent the next hour rehearsing my statement. Not out loud, just pacing the hallway and running the words in my head. The house creaked in all the familiar spots, the floorboard in the entry, the cabinet hinge in the kitchen, little imperfections that reminded me this wasn't just a house. It was ours. Imperfect, solid, earned. Do you think they'll actually vote her out? Aiden asked. I stopped pacing and looked at him. I think they'll have to choose, her or the truth. He nodded quietly. You gonna wear the blazer again? I glanced at the closet, the navy one from the funeral, from the last meeting. I shook my head. No, this time, I wear what I want. I pulled on a simple blouse, soft gray, the kind Mom used to wear to school meetings, calm, firm, just enough starch to feel serious. Aiden smiled when he saw it. Grandma vibes, nice. At 5:30, Robert Delgado called. He was my dad's old friend, a retired HOA attorney who'd reviewed our case once the footage went public. I'd asked for his opinion, nothing more. But now he wanted to show up. You sure? I asked, holding the phone between my ear and shoulder while scribbling final notes. Claire, he said, voice dry as gravel, if I had $1 for every HOA that thought they were above the law, I wouldn't be calling you from a landline. I'll be in the back row. Don't worry. I'm not there to talk. What are you there for? To watch someone lose? I smiled. Bring popcorn. Before leaving, I walked out to the bench beneath the oak. I sat where Dad always sat. The wind was soft, the air warm. The hydrangeas were gone, but the roots were still there, green buds already forming where she'd tried to cut them out. I touched the edge of the bench. My thumb found the old scratch Dad carved when he was sanding it, a line that had never smoothed over. I'm ready, I whispered, and for the first time since this all began, I felt it. Calm, not fearless, but anchored. Aiden grabbed his bag, triple-checked the USBs, and we headed to the rec center just before sunset. As we pulled up, I noticed something new. A row of chairs set up outside, some neighbors waiting early. One held a copy of Deborah's flyer, ripped clean down the middle. Another waved at me as we walked past. Inside, the air buzzed, not with hostility, but anticipation. People weren't just curious now. They were watching, listening. Deborah was already there. She didn't smile this time. She didn't even look at me. She just tapped her pen against her folder, fast, rhythmic, like a clock running out of time. Deborah didn't speak a word as we entered the room. She didn't have to. The look on her face said it all. Tight jaw, that clipped pen tapping against the folder like a nervous tick, her eyes fixed somewhere over my shoulder, pretending I wasn't there. Too late for pretending. Bishop called the meeting to order with his usual shaky authority, but there was something different in his tone. Like he didn't want to be the one holding the gavel anymore. Tonight, he said, we'll be addressing the complaint raised by Ms. Claire Monroe against this board and reviewing new evidence submitted by multiple residents. The room was packed. Neighbors lined the back wall, some standing. Phones were out, recording openly now, no more whispers, no more looking the other way. I stood when called, file in hand, thumb resting against the corner of the folder, like I needed to feel something real. I'll be brief, I said, because the truth doesn't need 20 minutes. No one moved. Deborah didn't even blink. I placed the first document on the table. This is the original charter for Wisteria Pines. My father, Eli Monroe, helped write it. This page, I held it up, shows the emergency access clause was struck, removed. Not legally binding. A ripple moved through the room, quiet but unmistakable. I clicked the remote. Aiden dimmed the lights and played the clip. The screen behind the board lit up, Deborah's younger self, standing in the same room years ago, pushing for the very clause she later claimed had always existed. My father's voice cut through her argument like a scalpel. Not your call. Gasps, whispers. I turned back to the board. She's been citing this policy to justify entry onto private property. She tried my door in the middle of the night. We caught it on camera. The next video played, Deborah crouching on my porch, reaching under the potted plant, flashlight in hand. She didn't know she was being filmed. She did now. Someone in the crowd muttered, "Oh my God." I let the silence stretch. For years, I said, this board has operated under one voice, but that voice doesn't speak for all of us, and it definitely doesn't speak for the truth. I stepped back. Aiden shut off the screen. The lights came up slow, like the room was taking a breath. Bishop looked stunned. Carol avoided eye contact. Marla sat up straighter than I'd ever seen her, shoulders squared, eyes forward. Deborah stood. Her voice was low at first, then rising. This is a smear campaign. That footage is old. That document, how do we even know it wasn't doctored? Because I made the copy myself, Marla said. Her voice didn't shake this time. I kept records for years. You told me to destroy them. I didn't. The room shifted again. People were leaning in now, hungry for more. Deborah turned on her. Marla, you don't understand the legal ramifications. No, Deborah, I finally do. It was quiet again, and that silence hit harder than any shouting match. Robert stood up in the back, calm, measured. My name is Robert Delgado. I was counsel on the original Wisteria Pines charter. I'm willing to testify that the clause Ms. Monroe referenced was indeed removed and was never reinstated by lawful vote. Deborah opened her mouth. Bishop raised a hand. I think we've heard enough. He looked across the board, then at the crowd. Effective immediately, I motioned to suspend Deborah Linwood from her position pending legal review. Carol didn't hesitate. Seconded. Bishop turned to Deborah. You'll step down while we conduct an audit. You can remain a resident, but not on this board. Her pen fell silent. She didn't scream, she didn't cry, she just sat down slowly and looked out at the people she thought would never question her. People who used to nod at her in grocery aisles, who used to apologize for their own fences. Now they were watching her fall. I turned to leave. As I passed the front row, someone touched my elbow. Marla. She didn't say anything, she just nodded, small but real. The next morning, the air smelled different. Not cleaner, not sweeter, just lighter. I stepped onto the porch with my coffee and watched the sun crawl across the sidewalk. For the first time in weeks, the camera didn't ping. The porch was still. My mailbox was empty. No notes, no fines, just quiet. Inside, Aiden was dismantling the fake violation trap setup. He coiled wires and packed the sensors away in labeled bins like he was storing storm shutters after a hurricane. You think it's over? He asked without looking up. It's changing, I said. That's more important. Deborah hadn't spoken publicly since the board vote. She hadn't apologized, hadn't pushed back. She just vanished behind her shutters. Word spread that she was consulting a lawyer, possibly planning to sell the house. Nobody seemed too concerned. At the next board meeting, Bishop stood at the podium without trembling. Marla sat at the table, officially sworn in as interim president until the special election. She looked steady. I want to thank the community, she said, her voice measured, for not turning away when it would have been easier. We lost trust, but we can build something better. Applause followed, not loud, not dramatic, just real. After the meeting, I lingered at the back. A few neighbors came up to shake my hand. Some just nodded as they passed. One woman I'd never met leaned in and whispered, "You gave us permission to stop being afraid." I didn't know what to say, I just smiled. We walked home the long way that evening, past the house with the crooked welcome mat, past the cul-de-sac where the neighborhood kids rode their scooters like they owned the world again. When we got home, Aiden reached into the toolkit and pulled out the last deadbolt, the one my dad installed after someone tried to break in during the recession. He held it up. "You want to keep it?" I took it in my hand. The brass was worn, the edges dulled by time. "No," I said, walking toward the garage. "Let's finish it right." We replaced it with a new one, clean, strong, no history attached. Later that night, I walked out to the oak tree. The moon hung low, soft and orange. I sat on the bench and ran my hand over the wood, still rough, still scarred, but holding. A single green sprout pushed through the dirt where the hydrangeas had been hacked down. Small, fragile, but alive. I smiled. This house wasn't just a home, it was a promise, one I intended to keep. People like Deborah forget something vital when they hoard power. They forget that silence doesn't mean agreement. It means people are waiting, watching, choosing the right moment to speak. And once they do, no amount of paper fines or procedural language can put them back in line. We didn't win because we yelled louder. We won because we stood long enough to be heard. Some locks you change, some you break for good. Have you ever had to fight for your home or your dignity against people hiding behind rules? Share your story in the comments and tell me where you're watching from, because the moment you speak up, you're not alone anymore. You're the first crack in their wall.